Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, where you are hearing me from. Happy New Month to you all. We bless the name of the Lord for the bright new day. God bless you all in the name of Jesus Christ. I'm here this morning to talk about God's grace. Do you know God's grace? Do you believe in God's grace? Do you believe God's grace can be sufficient in your life? Do you really believe? Yes, God's grace can be sufficient for you. God's grace can speak for you. God's grace can see you through. God's grace can help you through. God's grace can bless you. God's grace can be sufficient for your children, for your home, for your ministry. Even this pandemic world, we need God's grace to see us through. We need God's grace for us to overcome this pandemic. You see in Genesis 6, verse 8, God's grace God's grace found Noah. It's God's grace, you understand, that helps Noah to overcome flood pandemic that time. Is this God's grace that even saved David from King Saul? Is this God's grace that can see us through in this pandemic world we hear now? Is it God's grace that can speak for us? And I pray that God's grace will find us, God's grace will speak for us, and we shall all see the end of this pandemic in the name of Jesus Christ. As a mother, we need God's grace to be a good mother to our children. As a father, you need God's grace to be a good father to your children. As a pastor, you need God's grace to teach your members the ways of the Lord, for you not to mislead them at the end of the day. You understand? As a Christian, we need God's grace for us to raise this Christianity race. We need God's grace to stand upright to the end. And I pray that God's grace will speak for us in the name of Jesus Christ. And I pray for all our children all over the world that God's grace will never depart from their life in the name of Jesus Christ. God's grace will reign in our life, in our home, in our marriage, always in the name of Jesus Christ. You know, in your home, you need God's grace. When God's grace is missing in your marriage, there will be storm. When God's grace is missing in your ministry, there will be a lot of problems. When God's grace is missing in our life, there will be a lot of disappointments. There will be a lot of family problems. But when God's grace, when God Himself clothes us with garments of grace, we will all overcome all our problems. And I pray that God's grace will speak for us always, wherever we go, wherever we find ourselves, in the name of Jesus Christ. I love you all. Stay blessed and keep using your fix marks anywhere you go. Bye. See you some other time.